Welcome to episode 15 of season 3 of Read by the Author. I apologize if you're listening to the episodes in real time, and you will have noticed that I did not release an episode last Sunday. I had a migraine and was incapable of functioning like a normal human being. However, I am feeling much better, and I could have recorded on Monday or Tuesday, I suppose, but I also just started a new book, and I needed to just focus on that for the week. So I'm back, and I'm excited to continue the story. So here is Time Anomaly. 37. Practice and perfect. "Tell me what you are writing," Heru said as he pressed himself against the back of my body, his heat burning through the thin linen of my dress, and wrapped his arms around my middle. He kissed my temple, keeping his lips pressed against that sensitive skin, his breath tickling the fine hairs growing there. My shoulders tensed, and I laughed softly. I leaned my head back against his shoulder and sighed. "I am describing the sandstorm and what we were doing, or not doing, while we were stuck together in that little cavern." I craned my neck so I could see his face. "And how angry you were." Heru started tracing slow circles around my belly button with his index finger. "I was not angry." I scoffed, or at least I tried to. It came out as more of a shuddering exhale. "You were most certainly angry." He stared into my eyes and shook his head. "I was not. I was terrified." My eyebrows rose. "You? Terrified?" "You are the most terrifying being I have ever met." His voice was soft, even. "I doubt that." The corners of his mouth twitched. "And yet it is still true." He released me and captured my hand, guiding me toward the doorway to the altar room, where he had laid out a small feast while I had been working. A wineskin, fruits, cheeses, and flatbreads covered the altar itself. Again, I raised my eyebrows. "How did you gather all of this so quickly?" Heru frowned. "You were inscribing for nearly an hour. It was not done so quickly." "Oh, I did not realize it had been so long." I mirrored his frown and shook my head. "How strange." "Perhaps you should take a break for the rest of the night." I glanced at the opening at the top of the stairs, where the first hint of dawn light shone through the doorway. "I believe it is already morning." "Then perhaps you should take a break for the day." Giving his hand a squeeze, I stepped closer, stood on tiptoes, and pressed my lips against his. "I will take a break to eat," I said when I pulled away, "but then I really want to finish this room and get the next one started. I do not want to forget anything, forget to tell you anything." I searched his eyes. "You would want to know everything, correct? That would set your mind at ease?" "As much as anything could, short of seeing you, standing before me, of holding you in my arms." His hands settled on either side of my neck, his thumbs fitting perfectly along my jaw. When his lips touched mine, his kiss was deep and penetrating, and I melted against him. "I will allow you to continue your work, but—" "You will allow it?" He ignored my question. "But I will tell you what to write in this new room." I pushed the upper half of my body away from him with hands on his bare chest and eyed him. "You want to write a note to your future self?" A tantalizing half-smile touched his lips. "Something like that." He held his hand out toward the array of food. "Come, let us eat." Not 20 minutes later, we had both had our fill and were standing in front of the false door on the right side of the altar room. My hand was pressed against the smooth, solidified aught, and my eyes were closed. I finalized my mental image of the structure I wanted to create, a simple, long hallway with plenty of space for many offshooting rooms, should I require them. With a single focused thought, I unmade the false door and expanded the solidified ought away from me for nearly 20 yards. When I opened my eyes, I found myself standing before the doorway to a gleaming, pearlescent hallway. I stepped through the opening and made my way to the end of the hall, where I went through the same routine, except instead of another hallway, I formed a doorway that led to a circular, domed chamber. Glancing over my shoulder, I found that Heru was still standing in the altar room, his focus on me hawkish. My nerves sprouted wings and fluttered in my stomach. Is something wrong? Ever so slowly, Heru shook his head. Do you have any idea what you look like when you do that? He approached, his pace steady, his movements smooth. I bit my lip and shook my head, watching him come closer. I felt like a cornered animal all of a sudden. Your skin glows and your hair floats around you like you are underwater. He didn't stop when he reached me, but forced me backward into the freshly formed room with his body. You are a goddess, he said, his voice husky, his eyes darkening with promise. You are my goddess. My butt and shoulder blades touched the smooth, cool wall, and Heru stopped, his body almost touching mine. Almost, but not quite. Make a door, little queen. Why? I asked, even as I willed one into being, and darkness engulfed us. Because I am about to help you learn how to remain more focused on your surroundings while you write, and I do not want anyone to interrupt such a valuable lesson. It is too dangerous for you to remain so unaware. He breathed in deeply near my neck, his exhale giving rise to goosebumps, but still he didn't touch me. Give us light, little queen. I swallowed and did as he requested, making the walls glow with a soft luminescence. How are you going to help me learn to be more aware? A promising grin spread across his face. You are going to record everything I do to you, describe how each touch makes you feel, until I decide that you have practiced enough. My breath hitched. The task sounded impossible. I do not think I will be very successful. I do not think you have much of a choice, because I am not stopping until every surface in this chamber is filled with your words. He moved so his mouth was just hovering over mine. I could lie, write gibberish, I said breathily. You would not be able to tell. Heru pulled away, his grin turning wolfish. In 4,000 years, I would. I imagined Marcus reading my descriptions of his past self, making love to me, and my heartbeat faltered, then resumed beating triple time. Begin writing, little queen. I believe today is going to be quite interesting. I licked my lips and raised my eyes to the very top of the dome. Letting out a shuddering breath, I started writing. Your hands are sliding up my arms. Only your fingertips are on my skin. It almost tickles, but it feels too good. Goosebumps are spreading out from every place you're touching me. You're holding my arms over my head, commanding me to keep them there. Your fingers are skimming down my arms, down the sides of my body. Your touch is so gentle, so light. I want you to tear off my dress, but you're only lifting my skirt, slowly, so damn slowly. Everywhere you touch, my skin feels like it's on fire. I need you to... Oh my God, Marcus. You're on your knees and... Author's note. Sometimes I forget how, dominant... He's not a dom. Not like Dom is a dom. Just how dominant, domineering... I don't know, alpha, commanding, I mean, Lex talks about it, how it's like an ongoing issue is the struggle for control between them. But sometimes I forget about that because it's been so long since I've been in their story as an author. Yeah, persuasive. He knows how to get what he wants. Some might call it manipulative, I don't know. 38. Routine and disturbance. Living with Heru and his family wasn't nearly as awkward as I had expected it to be. Days passed, filled with mornings spent helping Sechsichet with the 2 younger children while she did around-the-house things. Afternoons spent working in my underground sanctuary behind Nguyen's palace. Evenings spent training with Nguyen and usually some combination of Set, Nekure, and Aset. And nights spent with Heru. True, Heru was almost always around me during the day's activities as well, but it was the nights that I treasured. I would erect an odd barrier in the doorway and windows of my sleeping chamber in his home, locking the 2 of us and our sounds inside until morning. And every morning, just as the sun was peeking over the cliffs surrounding the oasis and Heru and I were dozing together, limbs tangled and minds lulled into contented sleep, a tapping would start on the other side of the odd door. And every morning, Heru and I would groan sleepily as we donned our discarded clothing before I willed the barriers to revert to their former state. Air. Tarset, Heru's youngest daughter, a tiny 4-year-old, would scamper in for some early morning snuggles. She was so obviously a daddy's girl, and I was just grateful her love of her father hadn't resulted in jealousy for all of the time he spent with me. In fact, the reverse seemed to be happening. Okay, author's note. If you're watching the video, you can see me just grinning like a total goofball. It's just so fun because right now the series that I am writing is Tarset grown up and her adventures time traveling. Unintentional time travel adventures. And it's just so fun it's been a long time since I've read this part, her as a little girl. And yeah, little Tarsi is just she's a fun little kid. So it's fun to come back to this. Just before dawn, 2 weeks after Heru and I first bonded, I lay facing him on one of the thin pads that passed for mattresses in this time. I had grown accustomed to them, had even started to sleep quite restfully, though spending every night sleeping beside Heru might have had something to do with that. The barriers covering the window openings were gone, letting fresh desert air fill the room, and Heru was tracing symbols on my hip with his fingertips, his eyes lidded with morning languor. My face scrunched as I concentrated. I stayed like that for several seconds while he ran through the series of symbols again, then shook my head. "It is too many. You do not play fair, Heru." His lips twitched, but he held back a smile. "Hathor, Alexandra," he said, repeating the first symbol, a disc resting in the cradle of 2 curving cow horns, which had become his go-to symbol for me, since Alexandra was almost impossible to spell out phonetically using hieroglyphs. He moved on to the next symbols as he slowly uttered the rest of his tactile message. "Is the goddess I will worship, the queen I will serve, the wife I will be faithful to, the woman I will love." His gaze seared into my soul. "For all eternity." I blinked rapidly, fighting back the tears suddenly welling in my eyes. Leaning in, I pressed my lips against his, taking his mouth as tenderly as he had taken my body only hours ago. "Heru is the god I will worship, the king I will serve, the husband I will be faithful to, and the man I will love for all eternity," I said, a hair's breadth from his lips. "I am no king." "Not yet," I didn't say. I only smiled and stared into those molten golden pools. One day he would be the leader of our people, elected by the Council of 7 after both Nguyen and Heru's father, Osiris, the Nezharet who would take over after Nguyen's death, were gone. But he didn't need to know that. Informing him of future deaths would only upset him, and causing him undue pain was the last thing I ever wanted to do. Tap, tap, tap. My eyes darted to one of the arched windows. The barest hint of golden sunlight was shining through the opening. As my lips curved into a smile, I held in a laugh. Based on the amusement sparkling in Heru's eyes, he was doing the same. How Tarset could time her demanding little knock so perfectly every morning was beyond me. But she could, and it was the most welcome joke. I was starting to fall in love with that little girl. Just a little. Tap, tap, tap. After one final short kiss, I sat up and glanced around the fairly large, relatively unadorned space in search of my dress from yesterday. The room didn't need decoration, not with the graceful, swooping, and swirling embellishments Nguyen had worked into the solidified art when he had created the palace. But I had added a few creature comforts in the form of a standing wardrobe, a couple chairs, a small square table, and a washstand, and a screened-off toilet area, all fabricated from solidified art as well. I found my dress hanging from the corner of the nearest chair by one strap. I made my way across the room, knowing full well that Heru was watching my every movement from the bed, and slipped the dress over my head. By the time I turned around, Heru was already in the process of wrapping his kilt around his hips. He tied the intricate knot far more easily than I ever could, settled back on the bed, and nodded. Tap, tap, tap. Smiling, I moved to the art door and pressed my palm against its smooth surface. It dissolved into a quicksilver mass, and when I removed my hand, dissipated in a cloud of colorful, smoky tendrils, revealing a small girl with enormous honey-brown eyes, chubby cheeks, and a mess of shoulder-length black hair haloing her head. Tarset's eyes were huge circles as she watched the final tendrils of fuchsia and lime green fade away. A broad grin spread across her round face, making her cheeks even chubbier. She giggled, then lunged forward, capturing my hand in both of hers and dragging me toward the bed. "All right, little fig. What do you command of me this morning?" I asked as I scooted onto the thin mattress after her. I turned onto my side and propped my head up with my hands, watching Tarset maneuver Heru's arms into a position she deemed acceptable. Finally, she curled into a ball between us and sighed. "I want to know what Xena does next." I suppressed a laugh and raised my eyebrows. "You like that story more than the one I told yesterday?" Tarset's round face scrunched and she shook her head. "Why does the princess need a boy to save her? She should save herself." I couldn't help it. I threw my head back and laughed. Pulling Tarset closer to me, I hugged her tightly. "You would fit in well where I come from, Tarsi." She abandoned her father and snuggled closer against my torso. And I realized that I had fallen in love with this little girl more than just a little bit. One day, in the distant future, it was practically ordained that Heru and I would have a couple children of our own, assuming my body ever reached the bonding pheromone saturation point. And the time I spent with Tarset made me yearn for that day's arrival. But it also set a deep-seated sadness further and further into my heart, because that day would only come after Tarset was a 4,000-year memory. Part of me longed to share my bittersweet torment with Heru, but doubt paralyzed my tongue every time I considered telling him. What if Nguyen was wrong? What if it never happened? What if we failed and the shoot tore me apart from the ba out, causing both my and Heru's deaths? What if there were too many what ifs? Gazing at me with those big amber eyes, Tarset said, "Will you take me there someday? I want to see where you come from." My throat constricted and my heart lurched. When my chin started to tremble, I forced myself to take slow, deep breaths. I shook my head. "I wish I could, little fig. I really do, but it is a place that only I can go." "Because you are a goddess?" "Something like that." She touched the corner of my eye, where a tear was doing its damnedest to break free. "Why are you sad?" "Because someday soon I will have to return to that place." She stuck out her lower lip in a pout, then smiled. "But you will come back." My next deep breath was noticeably shaky. "I do not know if I will be able to, little fig." "Then I will visit you." "Darcy." "You said that sometimes Xena goes to the places where only the gods can go. That is what I will do." Her eyes shone with fierce determination. I forced a tremulous smile and nodded. Okay, I lied. I would like that very much, I think. Good. She rolled onto her back and stared up at the high opalescent ceiling. Now, tell me what happens to Xena next. Laughing a soft, miserable laugh, I met Heru's gaze, and my tears broke free. I squeezed my eyes shut and cleared my throat. When Xena found out what happened to her son. It was mid-morning, and Nikure, Tarset, and I were sitting in the flower garden in the center of the Heru household's private orchard, surrounded by date and doum palms, as well as fig, olive, and peach trees, and with the palace's aught spires reaching high overhead, blocking the sun. Heru and 2 of his grown sons were clearing sand from the aqueduct's gutter, technology Nguyen had stolen from a later time, while Nikure was helping me practice my ability to control small pieces of aught more fluidly. Physically manipulating the aught may have been the only special power he had access to through his shoot, but he had had hundreds of years to perfect every minute nuance. The flower garden was the only place outdoors where we felt comfortable using our unique abilities, since the orchards were completely surrounded by the stone buildings belonging to Heru's descendants, and none in his line would ever betray him by sharing our secrets. Russ was frolicking among the poppies and rose bushes, chasing a delicate crystalline butterfly as it flew gracefully around the garden. Nikure had created the stunning little creature and was controlling its flight with the tiniest tether of aught stretching from its tail end to his index finger. Giggling, Tarset clapped as she watched. Nikure's butterfly returned to him, landing on his open palm and falling still once again. Now you try it again, he said, turning his pale blue eyes on me. I blew out a breath and glanced down at my own tetherless butterfly, then at Russ, who settled in the sandy dirt like a sphinx, but hadn't taken his eyes off Nikure's butterfly. It does not seem to matter how many times I try, Nikure. Nikure patted my knee with his free hand. It took me nearly a month to learn to maintain the tether. You learned to do as much in 2 days. He smiled. You doubt yourself too much, my friend. I couldn't help but return his smile, though mine wasn't nearly as confident. I took a deep breath. Very well, here goes. I touched my index finger to the butterfly's tail and pulled my hand away, creating a thin thread of unset aught between me and the figurine. Now came the hard part, willing each tiny movement into a seamless flowing motion. The left wing twitched. The right wing stuttered open. The left wing mirrored the movement a half-second later. Both wings glided upwards, closing together in a single smooth motion. I squealed, as did Tarset, and released the tether. I did it! My cheeks ached with the strength of my ecstatic grin, but as soon as my eyes met Nikure's, my excitement faded, and my smile slipped. His eyes were wide, his face even paler than usual. What? He pointed to my hand. Look at your skin, Lex. I did. It was glowing with a faint sheen of iridescence, shimmering with every color imaginable. Shit, I hissed, just as I felt the telltale clenching sensation in my chest. For the second time, my borrowed chute was overflowing with too much power. I jumped to my feet. Tarset, take Russ and run inside to your mother. She stared at me with round eyes, her butt apparently glued to the ground. Now, Tarset! Her eyes widened even further, but she didn't hesitate. She scooped up the kitten and sprinted through the orchard. I stumbled in the opposite direction, trying to think of the most remote place I could flee to in the shortest amount of time. If the power exploded out of me when others were too close to me, it just might obliterate them. I had almost reached the outer edge of the orchard when electricity thrummed in my chest, and my knee gave out. Catching myself with one hand on the sandy ground, I pushed myself back up to my feet and searched for a path that led away from the cluster of buildings that belonged to Heru's family. I had to get away before the power broke free, and I destroyed them. Another pulse crackled out from my chest, a little bit more intense, and I doubled over. Someone grabbed my wrist. Nikure, I realized, hoisting my arm over his shoulders and wrapping his own around my waist. "I have to get out of the oasis," I told him, between rapid breaths.
"This way."
He started guiding me at a quick walk, though I couldn't say where he was guiding me to, since all of my strength and concentration was going into holding the destructive energy inside me.
"Heru comes,"
he said. Heru's scent surrounded me as his arms joined Nikure's, lending additional support. Together they dragged me toward somewhere I could only hope would be secluded. Darkness surrounded us, and I realized we were in the tunnel that led through the limestone cliffs walling off the oasis from the rest of the desert.
"How long can you hold it in, Alexandra?"
Heru asked. I gritted my teeth, the power expanding inside me in more frequent and more intense pulses. "Not much longer." Suddenly, strong arms scooped me up, and I was being carried much faster than I had been able to move on my own 2 feet. We burst back into the light, Heru carrying me out into the desert at a full sprint. "Put me down, Heru." I was losing control. I could feel the electric power crackling over my skin. "Now!" Gently, he set me down on the sand, and I curled my legs up to my chest and hugged my knees. "Heru," I rasped. "Nikure! Run!" I clenched my jaw and took shuddering breaths. Wetness coated my cheeks as I held the expanding power in, hoping to give Heru and Nikure time to get far enough away from me. I dug my nails into my palms. I wedged my face between my knees. I squeezed my eyes shut. Throwing my head back, I screamed, and the power exploded from me in wave after wave of bone-shattering electricity. My flesh shredded, my muscles ashed away. I was unmade. For an eternity, I knew nothing but pain. Between one breath and the next, the outpouring of power ceased, snapping back into me and quieting, and suddenly I was whole again. I took harsh breaths, enjoying the feel of air whooshing in and out of my brand new lungs, of my brand new heart pumping oxygen-rich blood to my brand new organs and muscles. I could hear the faint swish-swish of footsteps in the sand, but my mind wasn't clear enough to make out where they were coming from. I just breathed, in and out, in and out, in and out. Arms were around me, pulling me close to a hard body. That scent, spicy and intoxicating and comforting. Warmth, happiness, home.
"Is it done?"
Someone asked. Nikure, I thought. Somewhere in the back of my mind.
"It is,"
someone else said. The one who was holding me. Heru.
"Though with how much she has been using the chute, I cannot imagine why it happened in the first place. She could not possibly use those powers any more than she already does. How could it build up to overflowing like that? It did not last so long last time." "No," Heru said, "it did not."
The fractured pieces of my mind rearranged, fitting back together. I sucked in a deep breath and clutched Heru. My fingers dug into the firm flesh on his back. "How long did it last?" I asked, my voice hoarse from that initial scream. Heru's arms tightened around me, and he pressed his lips to the top of my head.
"The sun is already beginning its descent."
Which meant it was late afternoon. I had been out in the Sahara, unrelenting power exploding out of me, for hours. I feared that we were running out of time, that I was running out of time. I took a deep, fortifying breath and loosened my hold on Heru. Pulling my head away from his shoulder, I looked into his eyes.
"We need to talk to Nguyen."
39. Destruction and Sacrifice.
"Take the chute out of her,"
was Heru's greeting to Nguyen as the 3 of us barged past his guards, who never would have stopped me in the first place, and into his private chambers, which were about midway up in his palace's tallest tower. Nguyen was in his compact circular courtyard, sitting cross-legged at the head of a tiny pool filled with silvery fish, trailing his fingers through the water. It was where I usually found him. He had once told me that the water helped him think, that its movement was so similar to the movement of time that had focused his thoughts, making the complex web of past, present, and future more understandable. As we entered the courtyard, Nguyen turned a steady gaze on Heru. There was something off about him, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it.
"I cannot and I will not,"
he said calmly. Heru strode forward, leaving Nakure and me to watch from just inside the wide, multi-arched doorway. He stopped on the opposite side of the pool from Nguyen and pointed back at me.
"She had another of those attacks. It's killing her." "I am quite aware, but if I tried to remove it, she would die instantaneously."
Heru's arm slowly sank.
"The only thing that surprises me is that the second attack did not happen sooner."
He turned his attention to me, and it took me a moment to recognize what was different about him. His eyes were still brilliant, but they shone with a silvery opalescence, much like the default appearance of solidified aught, instead of their usual rainbow hues. I rushed forward to stand beside Heru. "Nguyen, your eyes!" Nguyen gestured absent-mindedly to his face with one hand.
"While the presence of my shoot creates suffering for you, dear Alexandra, its absence does the same for me, it would seem."
I rounded the pool in 3 lurching steps, falling to my knees at his side. "I know pulling all of it out of me would kill me, but can you take some to save yourself?" His moonlight gaze washed over my face, and he shook his head.
"You must learn as much as you can, as quickly as you can, dear Alexandra, for I think this body is not long for this world."
My blood chilled as I wrapped my hands around his, demanding his full attention. "No, Nguyen, not yet."
"But I must. It is what has always been and what always will be."
His full, familiar lips curved into a smile.
"That is what you had a set to tell me after you saved her so many years ago."
I reared back. "What? Nguyen, what are you talking about?"
Long ago. It was how I knew you were the right choice."
His eyes narrowed and he tilted his head to the side, studying me.
"Long before me, at least. Still to come for you. Long ago for me, at least. Still to come for you." "You should not have chosen her,"
Heru said from directly behind me.
"You should have chosen another."
Nguyen blinked, his silvery eyes slowly angling upward.
"But I did not choose Alexandra. She chose herself."
Heru's sharp stare shifted to me. Eyebrows drawn together, I shook my head. I didn't think Nguyen was all there at the moment, especially because I most certainly hadn't chosen this path for myself. I helped Nguyen to his feet and guided him through the doorway that led to his crescent-shaped bedroom. Heru and Nakure remained in the courtyard. I sat on the edge of Nguyen's bed and, once he had settled himself on the thin mattress, stared into those unfamiliar eyes. "Rest, Nguyen, and I shall return for lessons in a few hours." He peered up at me, his eyes regaining some of their usual sparkle, if not their usual rainbow brilliance, and he chuckled softly.
"I see that you and Heru have been quite busy."
I shook my head. What are you talking about?"
"The saturation point, dear Alexandra. You have reached it."
He shrugged.
"It is yet another sign that my time, and your time here, is coming to an end. Tonight, I believe I will explain to you how to use the chute to travel through time."
I had reached the bonding pheromone saturation point? What did that mean exactly? But I still don't know how to restore Ma'at.
"Ah, but you do. The same thing that will restore balance to your body will restore balance. Will restore Ma'at to the universe."
He paused, watching me closely. When I said nothing, merely stared at him in bafflement, he added,
"When the shoots that once belonged to Apep and myself are merged with brand new beings, those beings will become the new Netjer, The next generation of true gods, the next guardians of Ma'at in this universe.
And still I stared at him, eyes widened by shock. My children? Smiling kindly, he nodded. Heru and me having kids. I shook my head slowly. That is what is supposed to save the universe?
Indeed it is, dear Alexandra.
I continued to shake my head. That doesn't...
I knocked the universe out of balance when I stole Ep15's chute and stored it within this body, along with my own. Your children must be kept safe long enough to come into their power. They must be protected from Ep15.
I nodded, more than a little numb. Of course. Nguyen closed his eyes for a moment.
I am so very weary.
Oh, I cleared my throat. I'll let you rest and come back later. Before I could stand, Nguyen's long fingers wrapped around my wrist.
But you cannot kill Ep15.
I eased back down onto the bed frame and shook my head, my mind taking a moment to catch up to Nguyen's abrupt change of topics. But then he'll always be a threat.
No, my Alexandra. I mean that you are incapable of killing Ep15. Only I could do that, but I never would, because to kill Ep15 would destroy Ma'at completely. Ep15 is. What is cannot not be. The universe is part of Ep15, just as it is part of me, or the raw part of me, and it cannot exist without either of us.
Nguyen exhaled heavily. Again, I shook my head. But how am I supposed to protect... What am I supposed to do, then?
You must trap him in a Netjar-Ot's body, then trap that Netjar-Ot as well.
Set. Nguyen nodded, his eyes drifting shut.
If Ep15 roams free, he will possess one of your children. He will use them to destroy Ma'at, and then the universe will unravel until nothing is.
He said nothing more for several heartbeats, and I thought he had fallen asleep, until his eyelids fluttered open.
If Ep15 becomes free before you can trap Set's body, then you must seal him inside a prison of solidified Ot. It is the only other thing that can contain a being such as him.
Nguyen's odd moonstone eyes locked on me.
You must not let him possess you or Heru. Your bond is the key, and it will unlock either a future of balance or a future of destruction, of nothing.
His eyelids slid closed again, and he sighed.
If he possesses you, while you still contain the chute, or Heru for that matter, once his chute is made whole within him, then you must give that chute to another. You must sacrifice yourselves for a chance.
Dropping Nguyen's hand, I stood and backed away. No. My head turned from side to side slowly. We won't. I will not kill myself. That was never part of the deal. Nguyen opened his eyes and speared me with his sharp gaze.
There is no deal. There is only truth.
I am no martyr.
No, dear Alexandra. You are no martyr. You are the Meswet, the girl child, the messiah of all that ever was, is, or will be. You are far from a martyr.
His eyes closed and his chest rose and fell several times, until his eyelids opened one final time. His irises were dulled, but once again shimmering with swirling colors.
You are a god.
I backed away another step, shaking my head more adamantly. I'm no god, I thought. I'm no god. But what came out was, gods don't die. The words were barely a whisper.
All things die.
Thank you so much for listening. That is it for this episode of Read by the Author. I will be back next Sunday to record the next part. starting with chapter 40. So until then, happy reading adventures.